tribe. I've talked before about assessment and assessing a client being over control versus under control, but the next thing I really wanted to talk about was the different subtypes of over control, because it's not as simple as just all over control people are the same. There are different subtypes. And of course, we need to consider that every human being is an individual, so even if someone fits into a certain subtype category, they're probably going to be different from the next person who fits into that category. But there are really important things we want to identify in regards to whether they're overly agreeable or overly disagreeable. And this will help us to understand the client a little bit better, as well as their commitment to therapy. But it will also help us to identify some of the treatment targets and some of the things that we're wanting to look out for with these particular clients. So first of all is the overly disagreeable subtype. It doesn't sound like a particularly nice term, but it is. These people are still nice people, so that's a really important thing to keep in mind first of all. So someone who has the overly disagreeable subtype is, I suppose, the main thing to keep in mind is they're motivated to be perceived as competent but not compliant. So the right thing or what they should do is going to be more important than relationships or friendliness. So they're less concerned about social approval, politeness, or social correctness. It's still important to them, but it's less of a concern to them. They're much more likely to want to achieve an objective or be right, even if that means they're going to appear unfriendly, bad-tempered, or disagreeable. And they're maybe not willing to harm interpersonal relationships, but it's less of a priority for them than being right. So they can appear, I suppose, in public as quite businesslike or serious, possibly flattened affect, and more likely to have the inhibited emotional expressions. Obviously, keeping in mind every human is different, but this is what we're more likely to see. Their behaviour is much more likely to be driven by a sense of duty, obligation, or ambition. So they're likely to follow rules of etiquette and understand what they are. However, you know, when they're going to be at, say, at a business meeting or trying to achieve a goal, they're probably less likely to come across as friendly or polite because there is a goal. They're very rule governed and can be very, very cold and detached where one of their goals is thwarted or ruined. They may appear quite strong-willed, and they may also genuinely struggle to connect with people. So it's not just that they put possible connection as a low priority, and maybe something they actually genuinely struggle with, that communication and that connection. They might really struggle with that laid back feeling, especially if it doesn't seem appropriate or it seems a little bit challenging for them from an emotional level. It's like, oh, I don't feel comfortable being laid back, or that doesn't seem to follow the rules of etiquette, in my opinion. These clients also might struggle to apologise, which again is a really important social signal at times. So these are sort of things that are likely to come across from an overly disagreeable perspective. And so this is what we're looking for as an assessor and as a therapist, is if some of these traits are coming out. If they are more likely to be aloof or arrogant or appear that way, if they're more likely to tell you what's right and what's wrong as opposed to try and not hurt your feelings. So these clients will tell you if they don't like your therapy style. They'll tell you if you do something wrong. They'll make it clear if they don't like the way you greeted them in the waiting room or the fact that you were late. They'll let you know about it, as opposed to possibly the other subtype, which I will talk about, who may not necessarily say anything, even if they're thinking it. So they're less concerned about hurting your feelings and more concerned about what's right, and achieving their own goals, whether it be a personal goal or a general goal. So that's our overly disagreeable subtype. Again, not necessarily nasty people, not necessarily people that we don't want to be around, but can come across as quite cold and aloof, and even a little bit arrogant and nasty sometimes, in order to achieve their goal. But obviously, if we're working with them and we've got a similar goal to them, this is probably going to be a very good thing. The other subtype is our overly agreeable subtype. So these clients are really motivated to be seen as competent and socially acceptable. They're very preoccupied and constantly monitoring themselves for signs of anxiety, and so I suppose, often really wanting approval from other people. So they're going to be very anxious about disapproval from others and feeling like other people aren't liking them. And they're likely to display quite disingenuous or incongruent expressions in order to avoid social disapproval. So these clients, and I tend to have a lot of these on my caseload, are more likely to smile when they're distressed, laughing when they don't find it amusing, expressing concern when they actually don't care. They're doing things that they feel are socially appropriate and to gain approval, even if they don't feel that way, which can come across as a little bit disingenuous. And sometimes you have to really look for those subtle signs. Sometimes they can be very, very subtle, and sometimes it can take a while for us to get to know the client to realize that they are actually not being genuine when they say what they're thinking. So for example, I've had clients who smiled when talking to me about sexual abuse, or they said, "Oh, I had the worst day," while obviously still smiling. And again, these people can seem so lovely, and even being so, I often don't want to say, please stop smiling, because their smiles are so lovely, but it is quite disingenuous, and it can be quite awkward. And these clients have also had friends often tell them, why are you smiling? This makes no sense. So this mask of acceptability, a mask of friendliness, whilst being lovely, can also lead to problem and may allow them to be quite switched off from other people. So they can sometimes, another point is they might adopt a style of self-disclosure that appears intimacy enhancing. So they might be able to say the right things or act in a right way, or to like feign interest in other people or concern, or I suppose pointing out their own sources of weakness in order to try and connect with other people, but still without actually letting through any vulnerability. Because one of the obviously main over-control principles is trying to not show vulnerability. So these clients are very good at, I suppose, trying to do what they think they're meant to do from a social perspective, but not necessarily doing so genuinely. They may be really quick to agree or concede defeat, even if they disagree. They may feel really resentful if they don't get recognized or appreciated. So this is a really important point, because these clients aren't likely to say, hey, I did this, or hey, I worked really hard for this, but they're really likely to want that approval from other people. They're really wanting other people to say, oh my God, you did such a good job, but they're not going to say that. So they're likely to stew. So these clients have a tendency to have a smile on their face, but then stewing underneath and being quite resentful. And have a lot of envy as a result. So these clients can often be a lot harder to work with, because they're not genuine, and they don't tell you when they're not happy with something, and they're going to agree with what you say and say, yes, that's important for me to focus on, or yes, I really want to do this, whereas actually they don't feel that way. And they can be difficult to actually understand how they're really feeling. Whereas an overly disagreeable person is more likely to tell you if they're not happy with something. An overly agreeable person, less likely to do that. So it's really important for us to understand these subtypes and what we're actually working with, because of A, treatment dropout, B, noticing our alliance ruptures are going to look different either way. Keeping in mind our pushbacks and don't hurt me's. I mean, there's no real rule about this, but try to understand that a pushback from an overly agreeable perspective is much more subtle than someone who's overly disagreeable. More likely to tell you straight out. So we're trying to identify what subtype they're more likely to fit in, so we can identify, issues in the relationship, as well as the more potential treatment targets for them from a social signaling perspective. So both within sessions as well as outside of sessions. There's a lot of suggestions in the manual and in the literature about what potential targets there might be, whether the client is overly agreeable or overly disagreeable. Again, they're all just general, because every human's different, but it does sort of give us an idea about what might be useful to target. So that's a little bit about our two main subtypes, our overly agreeable and our overly disagreeable. If you have any other questions, just let me know, and I'll talk to you guys soon.